Sorry, the table that my laptop is on is a little bit shaky, so I'm going to try to not move around too much. Okay, guys, thank you, first of all, Ziggy, for introducing this subject, which is not new in any degree in our Hebrew circles with speaking about the calendar. But what I did realize when I looked at the calendar, Ziggy posted a little picture, and I'm not going to put up the picture now, otherwise that's going to be all consuming, but it's a picture of how I would say let's begin by saying the Jewish people divide the year into four corners or into four sectors. And, and then it marks out the seasons, and it marks out the new moons and the Sabbaths and everything. And it interjects a number of non-biblical, but Jewish things into that. And I know that a lot of Christians ending up on this journey that we're all kind of part of end up hanging onto a lot of stuff that isn't biblical. And so in thinking, how do we unpack this? Because most of the stuff we actually really have touched on. I decided, let's start in the beginning. Because if you want to interpret the Hebrew calendar, hello, Marley, welcome. Hello, Madeleine.
Hi, Ahmed, thank you.
If we're going to interpret the Hebrew calendar as in the biblical calendar, we might as well go much deeper and speak about the foundations called space and time. Now, the good news about tonight is we will have to touch on some things which a number of you might have missed out right in the beginning when we talked about the Hebrew versus the Greek worldview. We need to start there because I think there's some misconceptions, even in my own understanding, that I'm starting to straighten out. And one of the things is, even in the book that I'm writing, I tend to take an opinion about the Greek versus the Hebrew worldview as if you can either belong to the one side or the other side, which I want to strongly say tonight is not the truth. One tend to think of the Greek mindset as a little bit more in the cognitive, whereas the Hebrew mindset is a little bit more in the actions, more in the expressions. And I think, although that is true, no person in the world lives in either two of the realms. In all of us, in all of our lives, there's elements of expression on a timeline, and there's expressions of the cognitive. So when we talk about the Hebrew worldview, I just want to make very sure we all understand, I'm not putting the one up against the other. I'm just saying that from a Greek philosophical point of view, and that we had been saying almost every single Zoom meeting, from a Greek philosophical point of view, the Greek worldview tend to obsess almost more with what's going on in the mind. And that is true. And we need to remind ourselves of that because it plays out in how we read the Bible in a very specific way. And then on the Hebrew side of things, I think the important two things is it's an action-driven language and it's a root-based language. In other words, when you study the Hebrew worldview, you are constantly confronted with two things that are both equally important. On the one end, you need to find out what is the action that the text is speaking about, and we need to find out, is there a parent or a child root word that you can drill towards? And once you get to that, obviously it opens up a whole new layer for which we need the Hebrew alphabet. I'm not going to concentrate too much on that tonight. What we are going to look at is the dilemma of space and time. Now, I'm not going to go into Einstein's theories of relativity, although those are things that actually interest me. But what we need to say is that in the Greek world, the space-time dilemma is two separate things. Although if you go deep into the philosophy of that and you start about how time bends and how space bends and all sorts of things, they tend to at least intersect again on some axis. But in Hebrew, the very important thing is that they're the same. And this is a very big and very interesting phenomenon. So we're going to have to look at another word. The word time, therefore, is not the correct word when we speak about the space-time dilemma in Hebrew, which is the foundation for looking at the Hebrew calendar. So, but I want us, let's start reading an unconventional book. We've never read from that. The book of, in Hebrew, Kohelet. What's Ecclesiastes? Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we're going to look at the first 8 verses. I'm reading from the TS98. Okay, chapter 3, verse 1. For every matter there is an appointed time, even a time for every pursuit under the heavens, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sue, a time to be silent and a time to speak, time to love and a time to hate, a time for battle and a time for shalom. And then it goes on. I would strongly recommend after tonight reading the entire Ecclesiastes. What I discovered in when I started with this whole study on the space-time dilemma in Hebrew, I realized that the entire Ecclesiastes is a book about space and time. Read it top to bottom. Even if you start in chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "What does man gain from all his labor in which he toils under the sun?" There's a big clue, but we'll get around to that. Very important. Chapter 3, verse 1, "For every matter there is an appointed time." The Hebrew word there is actually, it repeats itself, the two Hebrew words, which both refers to space and time. The one is zaman, zayin mem nun. And if you look at that from a root perspective of, it literally tells you that time or a place is a utensil for the chaos that continues. Okay? We're going to get around to explaining this. Okay? Zaman on the one end, and the other end you have the word ed, ayin dalet. Curiously, also the same word means witness in Hebrew. But if you take ed and zaman and you put them together, you basically find that the reference. Somebody there, somebody speak. The reference to time has always got to do with events. The Hebrews cannot measure time outside of events. And therefore, when you speak about an event, it is always something that happened at a certain place and therefore within a certain space. For that, the Hebrew has a word moed. It means the place of time. The place of time, moed. And you'll remember when we talked about the appointed times, and we have, I think, a 4-part series on that. When you look at Leviticus 23, it speaks about the appointed times of Yahweh, but some translations would actually tell you the appointed places of Yahweh, Moedim, the Moedim of Yahweh. This is because in Hebrew, there is no space without time. There is no time without events. There is no events without an event taking place on a timeline in a certain place. Does it make sense? So for a Hebrew to speak about some other abstract time in the future is an anomaly in Hebrew. Let me make it practical. The word olam in Hebrew gets translated in English to the word eternity. And very often you find the expression in Hebrew where it says eternity to eternity. God is from eternity to eternity, but that it uses the word olam. And olam in Hebrew means the horizon. It is a physical place. So the ancients understood it in this way. You would travel to the horizon. Let's say there was a landmark or something, a dune or a mountaintop, and you'd get to that point. And once you get to that place and you look out and you look further into the deserts, into the mountains, there is more space and another horizon. So literally the ancients understood the expression that we say eternity to eternity as from horizon to horizon, because time and space is the same thing in Hebrew. This is the one very important. The second important thing that we need to make is time in Hebrew is completely circular. In Greek, it is linear. There is a beginning to something, there is an end to something, and in between there's a series of events. In that regard, the Hebrew and the Greek are exactly the same. The difference is the Greek sees time as a progressive or a linear measuring instrument. In Hebrew, it is a repetitive, it's a measuring tool that measures something in a circle. Let's look at where do we find that. We turn to Genesis 1 and let's start with verse 1. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth came to be formless and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the spirit of Elohim was moving in the face of the waters. Now listen to this. And Elohim said, let light come to be, and light came to be. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim separated the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now, the problem is, we just read over that. But did you hear that? From the moment light is introduced, time is introduced. There is no time in Hebrew without light. Now we continue. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning, one day, one unit of time. And Elohim said, let an expanse come to be in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from waters. And Elohim made the expanse and separated the water which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it came to be so. And then it continues in this fashion. And then when we get to verse 14, this is interesting. And Elohim said, let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Pay close attention. And let them be for signs and appointed times. The word appointed times there is moed. So some translations dig into the theology, and they would say they can come to be signs. Et is the word for signs. It's a marker. And appointed times mean events that happens in space on a timeline that God deems important. And for days and years. Again, look at that. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it came to be so. Curiously, in verse 14, it says that the first function of the sun is not to bring light, as in making you see where you walk around. The first function of the sun and the moon speaks about the greater lights, the greater light and the lesser light in Hebrew. The one is to rule the day, the one is to rule the night. Now, pay very close attention. Before the sun and the moon, there was no time. The sun, and therefore the light, becomes the essential marker of the Hebraic understanding of how time works. Think of it. Every little circular day that we go through, there's daylight marked by the sun. There's the end of the day marked by the going down of the sun, and then there's a night. Then it repeats. So the small circle is marked by the day-night cycle, and it is all about the sun. Then you have 7 of these small little circles in a bigger circle, all marked by the sun. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and we know that the 7th day has got a name. It's called the Shabbat, with a different function. In Hebrew, it's said it's to be holy. Holy in Hebrew means it's got a different purpose. Those 7 small day-night circles on the week circle is all determined by the sun. Okay? Now, this is important. The next group of circles, which brings us to a month, is not determined only by the sun. It is now also determined by the moon. For you have roughly 4 of these circles with 7 small circles on them, okay, forming a month. But the designation of the month is not by the greater light, but by the lesser light. This is why we talk in Hebrew about a luni-solar calendar. So half of the truth of the Hebrew calendar is that it is orchestrated and governed by sunlight, by the day-night cycle. There is no time, there is no circular time without sunlight. But it fits into a bigger picture where it's about the month, because for God, the month is important. And this is where this subject starts getting into the calendar discussion, which I actually don't want to do tonight. I just want us to sit with the concept. It's so tricky for us because we've been programmed top to bottom that you start somewhere and you end somewhere else. And in between, there's some important things. And we talk about how we lose time and how we win time and how time governs us and how we have too little time and how important and how much time is worth to us. But the truth is, for God, it is only the events that are important. And the only marker to be able to speak about events is the sunlight. But once you get to the month cycle, very important, because we know when we start digging into the calendar, and what is really important, the events that are really the appointed times and places which God really deems important, which, by the way, leads us into his plans and his purposes, then you have to bring the moon into the discussion, because now you speak about moons. The word for month in Hebrew is exactly the same word as the word for a new moon. And it goes deeper in Hebrew. It says Rosh Chodesh, which means the head of the new moon, or the head of the renewal, is actually the word Chodesh. So every single month you have this repetition of circles on a day-to-day basis, governed by the sun for roughly 29 days. And then the question of the moon comes into place. And then as this discussion unfolds, we've covered all of this in the appointed times. Check those ones out on YouTube, where certain months have certain functions. Like, for example, in the first month, there are 3 appointed times that are very important. That's the bigger festival called the Passover, with its separate, the Pesach and the unleavened bread, the first fruits. Then in the third month, in the month of Sivan, we have 1 festival, 1 appointed time. And in the 7th month, we have 3 appointed times again. So here the discussion is about sun and moon. And what is interesting, because all of the feasts, all of the appointed times of Yahweh fundamentally connects to an agricultural cycle, but again, cycle, it is important that since the moon is used to measure the month, that there comes a discrepancy that needs to be addressed. And that's where this whole idea of a leap year comes from. At the end of every 3 years, you need to introduce a gap, because a lunisolar month is only 29 days, but a solar month on which the actual feasts runs on a 30-point-something day calendar. So there's a discrepancy of about 11 days in a year. So at the end of 3 cycles of missing 11 days, they had to add another month. And this we'll get into when we talk about the whole Hebrew calendar. Then it resets again. Then the solar part of the calendar aligns with the lunar part of the calendar. That happens every 4 years. But the point that we're trying to make is, when God addresses this matter of 2 great lights in the skies, it is all about designating time. There is simply no time without the sun. Let me give you another example. The word for east in Hebrew, there's actually 2 words. There's kedem, and there's another word. Actually, Mitzrayim is also the word for the east, or Mitzrayah. Both of them in the Greek vernacular translates to the east, but for the ancients, Kedem meant the place of sunrise. Curious. So even their sense of direction that was determined by the sun. The other thing is, opposite the east, where you get the west, is understood as the place of sunset. So all of this is also not only from an Hebraic perspective, but literally that piece of land that we call Israel or Canaan, then from the ancient world. It literally orientates itself in the language in terms of the geography of the land. The word for south in Hebrew is the word Negev. There's another word for south, also Arava, or the southern desert. But Negev means south, translated. But for those of us who've been in Israel, it just refers to the desert. So literally, for somebody standing in Jerusalem looking towards Kedem, the east, it's all about sunrise. And therefore, even the physical orientation is about, where does the sun come up? Because that's quintessential in Hebrew. If you turn towards your right, very often the south is also called Yamim, because it's from the right hand, Yamina, in terms of where the sun rises. That's called Negev, which is a desert. Behind you is where the sun sets. That's the west. It's also the word for the Western Sea, for the Mediterranean. And the word Safon, which translates to north, is where the enemies are. Everything is interpreted in terms of the geography of what the ancients understood from that physical piece of land. Now, if you pair up all these concepts with sunlight determining the day-night cycle, moonlight determining the designation for where do we begin and end our months, and you put these 2 together and all the separate events that God called his appointed times, his fixtures in space, time, on this circular dimension that we're talking about, and you connect it with the geography of the land, you realize that there is so much space for us to misread the text and make of the text and make of all the elements that that God puts out to be important, I believe is important, to make something of it that the text is not saying. So it is now 25 minutes and I've decided, let's just deal with this tonight. I just want us to think about sunlight, the greater lights, the function, how God assigns before light, before sunlight, there is no time. And from that point onwards, there's a day-night cycle. It was evening, it was morning, day one. Next event happened. It was evening, it was morning, day two, day three, day four. And then when it gets to day four, curiously, it speaks about let the lights in the come to be in the expanse of the heaven, and let them be for signs and appointed times. Let them separate day and night. This is foundational if we're going to look at the Hebrew calendar and why, if space and time is a single concept in Hebrew, we need to find another word. And that's what I started off with. I think we should talk about the word events. Because an event is always connected to a certain place, but also to a certain place in time. I think this is the closest word for our English to kind of marry this Greek Hebrew tension that we live in. Look, we live in a world where we try to excavate more of the Hebraic understanding, but truth is we're trapped in a world where everything around us is measured by a Greek standard or measured by a standard that's completely abstract. And in the Hebrew world, we know that this standard is much more concrete, much more action driven, much more philosophizing from another worldview. I've put a little article on the group. For those who want to read it, I read a number of articles, and that was actually one of the best. So I read another article by Jeff Benner, which I'll also put on, but I disagree with him on some points. It's so weird. This guy is absolutely my mentor, but now it gets to the point where I'm also realizing, that people's opinions are interjected on this journey somewhere along the line. And but I'll put it on, and it's a good read nonetheless. This is what I have to say. We are going to use this information, and please, if I can ask you, read Ecclesiastes, and then remember this word event. Speak about every single point on this circular timeline marks certain events. It marks, in other words, it has a geographical and a timeline component to it. And this seems to be the underpinning of a worldview that uses verbs. Okay, because a worldview that uses form and appearance is not necessarily concerned with time in the way that the Hebrews are. By the way, that's sometimes how they say the best explanation between Greek and Hebrew is Hebrew is a language that keeps itself busy with the verbs, and the Greek language is a language that keeps itself busy with form and appearance. For this reason, a lot of Christians don't even care that there isn't a festival like Christmas in the Bible, but they still celebrate that. Because we've gone after form and appearance. We've gone after all the outward stuff. But from an Hebraic perspective, the question is, why would Christmas be important? Because what was the function of Christmas? The function of Yeshua's life was not to be born. That was just an event. The function of his life was to be the perfect Lamb of Yahweh. That's the function. That's the event. And for that, there is a festival, And for all the importance, the matters the events that matter to Yahweh, there are functionally designated, appointed events in space and time. Sorry, it's so difficult to speak about these things because in our minds, we separate the two things. But we're going to look at why did God select certain events, and the only way that we can actually interpret it is from an Hebraic understanding. Because from a Greek understanding, we put a number of other things in because who cares? On our linear timeline, and the way we look at the world in such a philosophical and abstract way, we really actually don't ask the difficult questions. But this is what I want to leave you with. Please read Ecclesiastes. Read Ecclesiastes 3 specifically, wherever. By the way, who do you think wrote Ecclesiastes? Ever thought about that? Most people say Solomon, but there's no evidence for that. Interesting. If somebody has an answer, I would love to hear. It's making an assumption because it says it's written by Kohelet, son of David, the king. Kohelet, you never hear about Solomon being called Kohelet. It means something else, but it's assumed because that it's a son of David. But in Hebrew, if you're somebody's son, you're not necessarily his direct son. You're not necessarily the firstborn or the secondborn. For example, David is a son of Noah. Okay, somewhere down the line it means. But interesting. So we're not exactly sure who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. It could possibly be Solomon, but it's just an interesting question. Very often people ask the same about the Torah. Did Moses write the Torah? And then I go, well, Jesus said Moses wrote the Torah, so we can probably go with that. But but also Moses himself didn't say he was writing the Torah. That you need other sources for. Okay, I'm done with an intro on the Hebrew idea of space and time. Is it helpful? Does it make sense? Bye, Andries. Enjoy your life. Okay, Andries, you've got the first floor. Anybody? Any other thoughts, questions? I don't have answers, but I entertain questions.
Okay, well, I wasn't going to ask questions. So I'm glad that you don't have answers. No, it's just interesting. It's just interesting to me that God chose light to refer to himself in the spiritual manner as life. And then also in the physical form, he also chose light as the thing that would cause life to happen, basically. This has got nothing to do with the calendar now, but it was just interesting, like while you were talking about light now and the importance of having that. I believe it's very important that God said, let there be light. That the very first thing that he said was, let there be light. It's almost like he's saying, but let my very essence be the first thing that comes into this material world. And because I am the center, because I am the very beginning, everything will be related to me. Everything will be related to light, which is himself as well. And that's basically the foundation of the entire Bible, is everything revolves around him and his son and all that. It's just
Which
something
son?
that
Son with an O, son with a
both sides.
So Andries, so here's my challenge that I'm throwing at you for a second. You're absolutely right, by the way, but you're absolutely right from a Greek perspective. From a Hebrew perspective, one could argue just the opposite. One could argue the fact that it starts with light is God introduces the concept of time. But it also introduces the concept of space. Okay, I'm not so this is why I'm saying that's so difficult, because all of our words are rooted in some or other way of thinking. You know, we just use that almost the control grid to be able to make sense of everything around us. Because obviously I agree with you. The moment that light enters, I mean, when Yeshua rocks up on the festival of Hanukkah and say, I'm the light of the world, there are so many things happening at once there. Remember, a Hebrew mind thinks of the sun and therefore the light as defining day and night. So the sunlight gives definition for everything. And imagine Yeshua walking up and say, I'm the light of the world. You know, so in Greek we hear I'm the essence, but if you say I'm the light of the world, he's literally telling them, I define everything. I define every event. It is an incredibly strong expression. For us, we miss that. For example, on Shabbat, when we pray and we light the candles, that is the thing we're pointing to. We're constantly reminding ourselves that without light, there's no definition for anything else, because we're trapped in a space-time continuum. You know, we're trapped in this and ruled by this. But exactly. I'm just saying, it's so curious that this, if you can spot that, if you can spot when certain expressions, I mean, it's the same when Yeshua said, I'm the way and the truth and the life. It's the same thing. If you look at those words from an Hebraic perspective, you can understand that if you were a devout Jew, that you might have wanted to stone this guy. Because like he's in Hebraic understanding, the way you walk, the halakha they call it. In other words, the style in which I do my day. So it's all about events. Getting up, my morning prayers, how I interact with people, how I do business, whatever is called the halakha. They have, by the way, rules for everything. That is the way. And Jesus rocks up and say, I'm the way. I mean, you have to sit with that. Telling them you have to walk not like me, you have to walk in me. You have to lose your agenda. It's next level. But thank you for pointing that out. It is fundamental to the discussions, understanding the fact that light was the first thing that was made. In other words, we should actually be hearing, in the beginning, God created space and time. Because this is all.
And then Jesus says, I am space and time.
And then Jesus said, I'm space and time. I am the event that matters. Read Kohelet, read Ecclesiastes 3 with this lens on. For every matter, there is an appointed time. For every event, there is an appointed place and an appointed time. And that refers back to the sun and the light. Hectic.
But on that point, do you remember what Fadi said yesterday, day before yesterday, when he said many times Jesus said something and he started the phrase, but then he stopped. And then because people understood what the next part of the phrase would be, they realized what he wanted to say. I just want to ask, is that something that we can maybe delve into as well? With regards to us not actually understanding many of these things. And I'm just thinking about Fadi now. Do you remember what he said?
Yeah. For example, the example he used, maybe just for context for everyone, we had a fellowship the other day, and Fadi was pointing out John the Baptist's disciples came to Yeshua. And this is, by the way, one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because John the Baptist, for those who can remember the context, he's 6 months older than Jesus. His mother and Jesus's mother were good friends. But when John the Baptist in the womb of Elisheva, his mother, what was her name? What's John the Baptist's mother's name? Yeah, it was Elizabeth. Right, Elizabeth, that's right. And Miriam was Jesus's mother. It says that the baby leaped in her womb. So, and then again, let's apply Greek thinking. We say that he just knew that he was in the presence of a future king of Israel, the future king of Israel, the king of the Jews. Okay, but how does he die? He dies sending his disciples to Yeshua and say, are you the one? Or do we wait for another? Have you ever thought of that? We preach certainty so many times, but the one guy, I mean, Malachi prophesies about John the Baptist. Say there's somebody coming that will straighten the way for the king. Okay, and we know this is John the Baptist. A lot of people associate John the Baptist with Eliah, who has come back. But anyway, so John the Baptist starts out like as the prophet quoted by the last book of the Torah or the Hebrew scriptures. He dies sending his disciples to Yeshua and say, are you the one? And then what does Jesus do? Jesus quotes to him Isaiah 61. Isaiah 60, is it 61? Yeah. Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor. And then he leaves out the part, for those who know the scripture, it's the prophecy of the life of the future Messiah. What would he do? He would bring release for the captives. He would bring sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf. He would release those who are in bondage. But then Jesus quotes that passage back and he leaves out the bit that said, there will be release for the captives. And he tells the disciples, go tell this to John. This is a form that was very much used in Hebraic storytelling in the ancient world. There's heaps of examples. We can go into this, and by the way, this is the food. This is the shizzles. But the curious thing there is basically the Jews who heard Jesus knew exactly what Jesus did there. He was telling John the Baptist, you are going to die in jail. And it's hectic. So yes, so in other words, he basically told him, just quote the scriptures to him, I am the Messiah. But in the same breath, he provided a space for John to deal with the fact that he was not going to be released from jail. There's many examples. By the way, if you can think of anything, we can discuss it. There's heaps of it. Thank you. Okay. Any other? Paul? You call my slim mo.
Now,
you should put up
just
your
following
camera.
on to comment. Hey?
No, so if you're going to ask a very difficult question, you must hide your camera, or I must hide mine.
Yes. Now, just a comment on the creation of light and darkness before the sun. I think that is very intentional, due to the fact that I think that the guys that this was preached to comes out of Egypt, where they essentially worship the sun. And I think God comes and says, I made light before the sun. I actually give sun an order, or I actually put him in his place to tell him what it must do. Yeah. But before that, I created light. It's not the sun that creates light. And obviously that baffles our brains, because we think, what is the source of this light? Because it has to be the sun. But if you take that scripture literally, light was there way before the sun came on into the picture.
Absolutely. Light was created before day one, basically, if you think of it. Light defined everything. From there on, the only symbol that they could latch on to understand light was the light in the day and the light in the night. But you're absolutely right. And by the way, this is such an important point, Ian, because when we get to Mount Horeb, where they had the golden calf, we have a similar issue with Egypt still in their blood. We go and say, how can they worship a golden calf? But we must remember that for them, the Aleph, which is the ox, is in any case the only resemblance of God. God is a strong ox. So gone is Moses. What do? We build something, but it just goes to show that's all they knew. Put jewelry together, make it shiny, make it glitter, but make it inanimate. It's something that we can see. So it's the same thing. You have all these God de-Egypting them for 40 years.
They built a calf and they then declared a feast to Yahweh.
Yeah, but that's the point.
And 3,000 people died. So the intention wasn't. I mean, the intention was good, but God still rejected it.
Yeah. I think it was very necessary for them as a first lesson to learn that you're gonna have to sever your former understanding, and even if that was the only thing that they had to learn there, because from there on you see that God, there is an impatience with God, because this is so important. They cannot drag Egypt into Canaan at any and all costs. They needed to be detoxed from Egypt, otherwise they would just fall back on the old patterns. So yeah, profound.
Sometimes I wonder, what if the same happened to us during Christmas?
Festival. I know that. Yeah. I mean, I have been in meetings where that has been used as an example and did not go off well. But it's such people definitely do not want to hear that. But it's an amazing point to make about Christmas. Say, this is unto Christ. Christmas is for Jesus, really?
Yeah, just like that golden.
I'm very glad that you did not come out of Egypt straight, because that would be your last Christmas. I gave you my home.
I'll mute while we're unmuted and stuff. I also have a question. So you said olam means time or space, right? Or horizon. So
olam literally means the horizon.
Yeah. So when you say, like, we translate when we go Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, right? it's blessed are you, Yahweh, King. Like a lot of people sort of translate that King of the world, or like we say, King of the world that is coming.
Sometimes
So is that actually King of the horizon, or what are we saying? King of, or are we saying?
it literally, for the ancient Hebrews, Melech HaOlam is king of the horizon. But the understanding of the horizon was, remember, you have to interpret what they understood by it. The horizon is always just out of reach, because when you get there, there's another horizon. So their understanding of the horizon was, it's a place that is just not reachable. You can get to what you see now, but once you get there, there's another olam. So the understanding olam la olam, from horizon to horizon, has the understanding that it's just ongoing. There is no demarcated physical boundary line. The boundary line is only perceived from your vantage point, and once you get there, there's another one. So Melech HaOlam, very well done that you have your Hebrew prayer under the knee.
Thanks, Ali.
Very good. This is very interesting. Any other questions pertaining to this? We're going to have an early night. Okay. I hope this is helpful. I'm not going to labor this. Let's keep it sweet and short tonight. But remember, all of this forms the building blocks, the foundation of what I believe we should be looking at, and that's the Hebrew calendar. And again, what I said is, the nice thing about this topic is that we're going to look at a lot of foundational stuff again. We are going to put biblical interpretation next to Judaism, because they're not necessarily the same thing. The amount of comments that the religion of Judaism makes on the text has become synonym with the text for most people. And we need to also declutter and detox our understanding from that. I'm all for the Jewish people. They're the older brother, and all respect. But some things that they do, that's their way of life, their halakha, is stuff that Yeshua had strong commentary against. Said, you make that more important than the Torah. You make your comment on the Torah more important than the words of Yahweh. This was the problem. And you have, and this is still the all-pervasive problem in this discussion of the Hebrew worldview and Judaism, is that Jewish tradition has become more important than the words of Yahweh. And for a lot of Christians, we need to detox from that. We need to stop saying Happy New Year in the 7th month, as an example. We need to because we need to bring back Yom Teruah. We need to bring back the Feast of Trumpets, that is the festival looking forward to Messiah's return, et cetera, et cetera. There's loads of examples. Okay. Any last points? Then we greet each other. Terna, welkom. Thank you for being on the call tonight. All right.
Thanks, it's a pleasure.
Say weer, excuse, just again. There's a hectic latency on the line, actually. Okay. Anyhow, I'm going to call it a night. Thank you very much. God bless. Let's continue next week, and then we dig into the calendar. And remember, the calendar is a luni-solar calendar. We need to look at the moon and the sun. Shemesh v'Yarach. Both of them are important, the greater and the lesser lights. Okay, God bless you and have a fantastic week. We see each other soon.